At 80 years old, Brenda Lee, once the explosive voice behind I'm Sorry and Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree, has decided she's done being silent. For decades, she was Nashville's crown jewel, and then, just as quickly, its forgotten daughter. But now, from her quiet home just miles from the Grand Ole Opry, Brenda is ready to speak. And what she's about to reveal isn't just personal, it's explosive. With tears in her eyes and a tremble in her voice, she hints at something the music industry never wanted the world to hear. They didn't just use me, she says. They tried to erase me. In the next few moments, the tiny woman with the powerhouse voice is going to uncover a truth about Nashville that's been buried for over 60 years. And when she does, it's going to change how we see the country music machine forever. Brenda Lee's rise to fame wasn't just fast. It was unnatural. She was barely 10 years old when record labels began circling like vultures, captivated by her colossal voice trapped in a tiny frame. By the time she was 12, she had toured internationally. At 13, she was performing on the same stages as adult legends. But behind the glitter of TV appearances and sold-out shows was a child being pulled apart by powerful men in suits who saw her not as a girl, but as a gold mine. They called me Little Miss Dynamite, Brenda said in a recent interview, but I was just a kid who missed her mama. The interviews were scripted, her outfits chosen by strangers, and the grueling schedule gave her no space to just be a child. She would be handed a hairbrush instead of a doll and told to sing instead of sleep. There were nights on the road where she cried herself to sleep in cold dressing rooms, wondering when it would all stop. But the worst part, Brenda never truly had a choice. Her contracts were signed with barely any oversight. Most decisions about her career, musical direction, financial deals, even public appearances, were made without her input. Her voice may have belonged to the public, but her life belonged to Nashville's machinery. Years later, Brenda admitted she had no idea how much money she was really making, because someone else always handled it. And when she asked questions, she was told, "That's not your concern, sweetheart." To this day, the full details of her early contracts remain sealed away. Rumors swirl of royalty clauses that gave more to the label than to the artist, of backroom deals that traded her future earnings away for short-term fame. "I didn't know what I was signing," she whispered. "I just wanted to sing." And sing she did, hit after hit, chart after chart. But as her star rose, so did the silence around her well-being. Nobody asked how she was coping. Nobody wondered what it meant for a teenage girl to carry the pressure of a global spotlight. And worst of all, nobody in Nashville stepped in to protect her from the emotional toll it would take. Brenda's story isn't just about fame. It's about a machine that chewed up a child and called it success. And now, after 70 years, the truth is finally starting to surface. By the early 1970s, Brenda Lee's star had dimmed, not because her talent faded, but because Nashville quietly decided it was time to move on. New faces, younger trends, and a shifting music landscape meant that the girl who once defined an era was now seen as a relic. Radio stations that used to spin her records daily barely mentioned her, and industry figures who once praised her now acted like they barely knew her. It wasn't a fall from grace, it was a calculated erasure. Brenda remembers the moment it became clear. She walked into a familiar Nashville studio, a place where she'd recorded countless hits, only to be met with blank stares. The receptionist didn't recognize her. The producer on duty asked if she was a new session singer. That moment stuck with her for decades. "That's when I knew," she said softly. "They weren't just done with me. They wanted me gone." The betrayal cut deeper than fading fame. Brenda had given her childhood, her voice, and her health to Nashville. She was loyal. She stayed out of scandals, never rebelled, never lashed out. She was everything the industry asked her to be. And yet, when it came time to celebrate country's heritage, her name was barely mentioned. Other artists, some who had directly followed her blueprint, were honored at galas, and inducted into halls of fame. Brenda was often left off the guest list. Behind the scenes, there were whispers, rumors that executives believed she didn't fit the narrative, that her crossover success into pop made her somehow less country, that her quiet demeanor didn't match the bold personalities Nashville now preferred. She was too polished, too professional, too obedient. What hurt most wasn't being forgotten. It was being invisible, while others stood on the foundation she built. Brenda watched as tribute shows for country legends aired on primetime, featuring stars she had mentored or inspired. But her name was rarely mentioned. Her face wasn't shown. Her voice wasn't heard. And, in a twist of irony, her biggest hit, Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree, kept playing year after year, earning millions in royalties for the industry. But Brenda? She was sitting at home, watching it all unfold in silence. At 80, Brenda no longer wants sympathy. What she wants is truth, because her disappearance from Nashville's narrative wasn't accidental. It was designed, and she's finally ready to reveal who was behind it. While Brenda Lee's legacy played on radios and echoed through decades of holiday celebrations, her personal life was unraveling in the shadows. Fame had taken an invisible toll. The bright lights that once lifted her up eventually dimmed, leaving behind a woman grappling with anxiety, exhaustion, and a voice that was beginning to betray her. For the first time, Brenda is now revealing the health battles she endured quietly, both physical and emotional, that nearly ended her career long before the world even noticed. Throughout her 20s and 30s, Brenda struggled with chronic fatigue and vocal strain. Doctors warned her that her voice, the one that carried her to stardom, was under attack from years of overuse and stress. But Nashville didn't want a break. They wanted more records, more tours, more smiles. Rest wasn't an option. I was sick, but I didn't know how to say no, Brenda confessed. I thought if I stopped, they'd forget me altogether. Behind the scenes, anxiety crept in. Hotel rooms felt like prison cells. The loneliness of being on the road became unbearable. She began having panic attacks before shows. Sometimes she'd cry in her dressing room moments before going on stage, then pull it all together with a smile the audience never questioned. The pressure to be perfect, even as her health declined, was unrelenting. I didn't know what burnout was back then, she said, but I lived it. In her early 40s, she faced a devastating scare. Vocal cord nodules. Surgery was a possibility. The thought of losing her voice forever sent her spiraling. Thankfully, through rest and therapy, she avoided the operating table, but it came at a price. Her confidence. From that point on, Brenda sang with fear. Every note carried the weight of possible collapse. And Nashville? It barely blinked. There were no wellness breaks, no mental health days. Brenda quietly stepped away from regular touring, but the industry never checked in. The same city that had built its empire on her back was now too busy chasing newer, younger voices. Brenda spent the next few decades living in quiet retreat, nursing her health and trying to find peace in a body and mind that had been sacrificed to fame. Now, at 80, she's telling the story Nashville didn't want to hear, that behind every chart-topping single was a woman battling to hold herself together. And she's not finished talking. The real pain, she says, hadn't even started yet. The part that stings the most for Brenda Lee isn't the health struggles, the fading spotlight, or even the decades of industry silence. It's what they did to her legacy, and how they quietly handed it off to others without ever giving her credit. At 80, Brenda finally speaks on the part of her story that's been buried the deepest. How Nashville tried to rewrite history, removing her name from the roots of modern music, while letting others plant flags in the soil she first tilled. She was one of the first to truly bridge the gap between country and pop. Before Dolly, before Reba, before Shania, there was Brenda. She charted internationally, became a teenage sensation in Europe and Asia, and was a household name while other country stars were still opening county fair shows. But when the time came to name pioneers, when award shows honored the firsts, Brenda was rarely on the list. I'd watch them celebrate all these amazing women, she said softly, and I'd think, I remember when they were sitting backstage, asking me how to handle the press. Brenda doesn't say this with bitterness. She says it with sadness. Because it wasn't the other women's fault. It was the industry's choice to push Brenda's image into the background. The suits in Nashville decided she didn't fit the evolving narrative of country music's tough, independent woman. Brenda had been too sweet, too well-behaved, too willing to go along with what she was told. That obedience made her a star, but it also made her easy to replace when bolder personalities came along. And the money? Brenda says there were entire catalogs of her songs that were sold or licensed without her full understanding. They used my voice to build a business. Then they handed that business to people who didn't even know me, she said. When Country Music Hall of Fame exhibits began cropping up, Brenda noticed something else. Photos of her were smaller, sometimes missing entirely. Her platinum records were in storage. Her name was included, yes, but not highlighted. Not celebrated, more like a footnote than a foundation. She says she's not angry, just disappointed, because legacy should be earned, not erased. And if Nashville won't tell the truth about who helped build the house, then Brenda will, because she's done being quiet. The woman they once called Little Miss Dynamite has one final explosion left, and this time, it's aimed at the heart of country music itself. There's one story Brenda Lee never thought she'd tell, not because it was too scandalous, but because it was too painful. But now, at 80, she says the weight of carrying it alone has become heavier than the risk of finally speaking it aloud. It's the story of betrayal. Not by Nashville executives or anonymous handlers, but by someone she once called a friend, a fellow artist, a name known to everyone. Brenda never names them directly, but when she begins talking about the golden boy of the era, fans immediately know who she means. He was charming, successful, and constantly in the spotlight. And in the early 1960s, their careers were closely linked. They performed on the same tours, posed for the same press photos, and were often marketed as a kind of wholesome duo, country's answer to a teen dream pairing. But behind the curtain, things weren't as innocent. According to Brenda, he saw her as a threat. While the press painted them as friendly equals, he made sure Nashville's power players saw her as difficult, overly ambitious, and too big for her britches. She didn't find out until years later that he had actively lobbied to have her removed from a major international tour, claiming she was distracting the audience. It broke my heart, Brenda admitted, because I thought we were in this together. Turns out I was competition. That betrayal sent a ripple through her career. Promoters pulled back. Radio play slowed. It wasn't just about his influence. It was about what it confirmed. That in Nashville, loyalty meant nothing when egos were on the line, and it wasn't the only time Brenda faced personal attacks from within the community. There were female singers too, ones who saw her early fame as undeserved. One even confronted her backstage at an award show asking, "When are you gonna make room for the rest of us?" Brenda was stunned. She had no idea that her very existence was seen as a problem. But the most painful part? When Brenda tried to speak out back then, she was told to stay quiet. Don't stir the pot, you'll make enemies. Let it go. So she did, for 60 years. Now, that silence has expired, because Brenda isn't naming names out of revenge. She's naming patterns. She wants the next generation to know that behind the glitz of Music Row are shadows long ignored, and that even a legend can be pushed aside if they shine too brightly. At 80, Brenda's voice still carries power, and this time, it isn't for a hit single, it's for the truth. In recent years, as the world slowly began rediscovering the voices it had long overlooked, Brenda Lee's name started to resurface. But not in the way she hoped. TikToks featured her Christmas classic. Documentaries listed her in quick montages of early pioneers. But no one asked her to speak. No one sat her down and said, "Tell us what really happened." That silence, once again, felt intentional, as if the industry wanted her image, but not her story. So Brenda decided to take matters into her own hands. In a quiet sit-down filmed at her home just outside Nashville, she opened up, not to a record label, not to a network, but to a small group of independent filmmakers. No big production, no fancy set, just Brenda, a chair, and a story 60 years in the making. And what she revealed in that interview shook everyone in the room. She talked about secret contracts, ones she was pressured into signing before she turned 18. She talked about royalties that vanished into companies that no longer exist. She spoke of being followed by handlers during international tours who made sure she never wandered off script. They didn't want me talking to other artists, she said. They were scared I'd find out how different my treatment was. She also revealed something most never knew. There was a time in the early 80s when Brenda considered walking away for good. I had a bag packed, she said. I was ready to move to a cabin in Georgia and never sing again. The only thing that stopped her was a letter. An unexpected fan letter from a woman in Iowa who said Brenda's music helped her survive her divorce. That letter reminded her why she started in the first place, but it didn't erase the pain. One of the most haunting moments of her interview came when she described a night in 1975, when she stood outside the Ryman Auditorium in the rain, unable to get in because she wasn't on the list. She wasn't performing, and no one recognized her. I stood there thinking, how did I go from headliner to stranger in my own town? That night stayed with her for decades. And now, as she nears the twilight of her life, Brenda isn't interested in awards or ceremonies. She's interested in honesty. Because while Nashville may finally be ready to honor her music, Brenda wants to make sure they don't get to rewrite her truth along with it. Not this time. Part 8 begins with something few expected. Brenda Lee returning to the very places that once broke her. Not with anger, but with clarity. At 80, she walks through the back halls of the Ryman Auditorium and the Grand Ole Opry House, not as a nostalgic guest, but as a woman reclaiming the spaces that once tried to shrink her. There are no crowds, no press, just Brenda, quietly standing on the same wooden floors where she once sang to millions, now whispering to herself, "I'm still here." But what hits hardest in this chapter isn't the walk down memory lane. It's what she finds inside a box left untouched in her attic for over 40 years. I wasn't ready to open it, she says, lifting the lid. Inside are old tour schedules, handwritten fan letters, photos, and something that chills her to this day. A contract, an original agreement from her early years, stamped and signed by a now-defunct label. The language is outdated, but clear. She was entitled to a percentage of royalties she never received. And tucked inside that same box? A cassette tape labeled only with a year, 1963. The audio, brittle and warped with time, plays her voice. Raw, emotional, unlike the polished tracks we know. It's a song she wrote herself, one that was never released. They told me it wasn't marketable, she says, tears filling her eyes, but the lyrics hit like a confession. They took my light and used it up, then left me in the dark. It's the smoking gun she didn't know she had. A song that reveals how early she understood what was happening to her, even if she couldn't stop it. Brenda contemplates releasing it now, decades later. Not for fame, but for truth. For every girl who felt invisible after they were no longer useful. For every voice that was sweet enough to sell, but never loud enough to matter. She also reveals she's been speaking to other women from her era. Some retired, some still performing in smaller venues. They've been having private conversations about the past, and Brenda's truth-telling has inspired them to consider speaking out too. Maybe my voice isn't as powerful as it once was, she says, but maybe now it's more important than ever. And as the tape winds down and the silence returns, Brenda Lee, who once rocked the charts, sits in the stillness, no longer afraid of being forgotten, because now she's telling the story herself. And the story's not over yet. As the final chapter of Brenda Lee's truth unfolds, there's a quiet strength in her voice, one that doesn't beg for attention, but demands respect. At 80, she's no longer the teenager belting out hits to screaming crowds, nor the woman quietly erased from the country music conversation. She's something far more powerful now, a living archive of what the industry did, and what it tried to hide. In this last part of her story, Brenda Lee does something she once thought impossible. She forgives, not because what happened to her was right, not because she's forgotten the betrayals or the years of silence, but because, as she says, you can't carry pain forever and expect to survive. Forgiveness, for Brenda, isn't an act of mercy for others. It's a release valve. It's her choosing peace after a lifetime of being told to stay quiet. But make no mistake, she's not letting the industry off the hook. In an emotional moment during a small tribute event held at a Nashville venue, not the Opry, but a smaller, more intimate space filled with younger artists, Brenda is invited on stage. For the first time in decades, a new generation rises to applaud her, not out of obligation, but admiration. They know her story now, and they see the blueprint she laid for them to walk on. She takes the mic and looks out into the crowd. "You don't owe this town your soul," she says. "Sing your truth, and don't let anybody turn your whisper into their silence." The crowd is quiet. A few artists wipe their eyes. A few fans cheer, and in that moment, Brenda becomes something greater than a legend. She becomes a warning and a guide. Before leaving the stage, she hands the event organizer a flash drive. "There's a song on here," she says. "I wrote it a long time ago. Never thought I'd let it see the light. Maybe now's the time." It's the same song from the cassette, the one Nashville said was too raw, too personal, too dangerous. She walks off slowly, her small frame wrapped in a simple shawl, but with a posture that says everything. She has nothing left to prove, nothing left to fear. Because Brenda Lee has done what few ever get to do. She told her story in full, with no edits, no filters, no permission. And as her truth echoes beyond the walls of the industry that once discarded her, it leaves a permanent mark, one that can't be charted, but can be felt in every artist who refuses to be silenced. She was Little Miss Dynamite once. Now, she's dynamite lit.